Welcome back to the Brewer Fanatic podcast. We are your hosts, Jack Stern and Spencer Michaelis, coming to you guys at the end of every week to recap all things Brewers. We have a lot to talk about this week, so everybody buckle up and strap in or whatever other along for the ride metaphor you want to use. But first, Spencer, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing pretty well. It's been a busy week for me, super busy night for me, but I'm very happy to talk some more Brewers, and yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into this. How are you doing, Jack?
I am doing great now because I had day off. The Brewers in the middle of their homestand, so finally a day where there's nothing going on for me. I was up north for most of the weekend that just passed here during this Padres series that we're going to talk about. So I did not catch a lot of the action for that one, and then coming right back home, recapping or covering, I should say, a couple games against the Rangers here, which those are going to be the two series we're going to talk about this evening. But in light of the fact that I was not around for most of this Padres series, I'm going to pass it off to you here to talk about everything that happened to close out the West Coast trip for the Brewers over the weekend. Milwaukee dropping 3 of 4 to the Padres. I did kind of go through and watch some of the highlights of these games once I got back into town, but didn't really get a super close-up look at this. But you did. Did you stay up late to watch some of the West Coast action here in the end, or was it mostly day games in this series?
Oh no, they were late, at least Thursday,
Okay.
Friday they were, but of course I stayed up, Jack. Why would I'm going to schedule my entire life around Brewer games. That's usually how it works for me.
As you
Um,
should. As you should.
Yeah, I know. That's the commitment to the podcast that all you listeners should be respecting. Jack decides to go up north and just ignore these games, but I'm here grinding
Yep.
away for you. But yeah, we'll jump right in with game one here. Brewers end up losing this one 7-6. Bryce Wilson makes the start. 4 2/3 innings, 5 earned runs, 7 hits, 2 walks, 5 strikeouts, and 3 homers allowed, which was really what did him in this one. Honestly, he pitched okay, and the strikeout to walk ratio, like, that's for Bryce Wilson, that will take 5 strikeouts to 2 walks, but the homers came back to bite him for sure. The first one happened directly after a Bryce Terang. It's not an error, it's a fielder's choice, but he bobbled a potential double play ball. Only ended up getting 1 out on the play, and that brought Manny Machado to the plate with first and third, 2 outs. Wilson put him in an 0-2 count, and then he didn't make a terrible pitch, but he made too good of a pitch on 0-2, a fastball on the outside corner, and Machado was able to hit it into the shortest part of their ballpark, which is that right field corner. And then the next batter, he gets ahead of with 2 strikes as well, and Jackson Merrill takes a curveball below the zone out to right as well. So it was very quickly 4-1 after the Brewers had put up 1 run in the top of the first. Few innings later, Willie Adames hit a 2-run homer, crushed a 2-run homer to straightaway center, made it 4-3. Tatis came back, hit the 3rd homer off of Wilson in the next half inning. A couple innings later, Jurickson Profar ended up doubling, is what it was ruled. It was misplayed by Christian Yelich. He lost it in kind of the ribbon board or the lights. And this was also directly after a ball was called on a pitch that was very much in the zone and would have ended the inning against Profar, so a bit of tough luck there. At the time, it made it 6-3. It didn't feel like it was going to be a big deal, but the Brewers ended up making a pretty big rally, scoring 2 runs off of Jeremiah Estrada in the top of the 9th inning. Estrada's been one of the best relievers in baseball this year, but he was pitching for the 3rd time in 3 days, and his stuff did not look the same as it had before. Rhys Hoskins had the big hit.
I think he's also been pitching through an illness. I thought I saw something a couple days ago that said that he's been pitching through a little bit of a bug lately, which was funny because it was just something that popped up on my Twitter feed talking about that. But basically, he'd been pitching for a few days with just some kind of, I don't know if it was a flu or a virus or whatever it was. And it was funny because the tweet was painting this as like a good thing, like look at how tough he is that he's pitching through this, which give a guy credit for wanting to do that. That's a real competitor mentality. But then you look at his numbers during that stretch, they're not good.
No.
I don't know what the exact number is, but I think he's given up like 8 runs or something during this stretch right now. So, you respect a guy who's willing to do that, but maybe he shouldn't.
Yeah, that feels like something Mike Schilt would respect too much and be like, yeah, we're going to pitch him. He's willing to go out there and do this for the team. And yeah, this he barely threw the splitter in this outing, which was weird. And that's been by far the pitch that's kind of carried the profile. I mean, it's a good fastball. The slider is not great, and he threw a lot of sliders. And if I remember right, Reese hit a slider for the game-tying double, which almost got out. It kind of hit the middle of the wall in left field, nearly a go-ahead homer. Was stranded at second after that, and then Yoel Payamps struck out the first two hitters in the bottom of the ninth inning. His fastball was looking really good. He got a lot of swing and miss, some bad swings, some late swings. He had Cronenworth in a 3-2 count, and he was not squaring up the fastball in this count, and they ended up going with a slider. Now, Payamps threw a terrible slider. It ended up being middle, right down. I mean, it was exactly where any hitter would want to pitch. But to me, it wasn't a great pitch call from Contreras because he was not touching that fastball, at least not well. He was not seeing it well. If anything off speed, I probably would have gone changeup to try and make it look similar to the fastball and get him to go out and get it. But the slider ended up being a terrible pitch and a pitch that probably wasn't a great idea to begin with. And Cronenworth crushed it. Barely kept it fair, but he did. And that was the game. Walk-off home run for Cronenworth, who has been a Brewers killer for his entire career, it feels like, and he certainly continued that series, this series, as we will see moving into the next games. But game 2, Colin Ray on the bump. It was not a Colin Ray special today, Jack. Unfortunately for all of us, we did not get to witness that.
It's because
Ray
I
ended
watching.
up going. Yeah, it wasn't anything really. He wasn't great in this one. 5 1/3, 6 hits, 5 earned. 2 homers allowed. He did not have a single whiff in this start. There was a lot of hard contact early in the game. He was getting away with it for a while, it felt like. It ended up catching up to him, as we'll talk about in a few minutes here. But the Brewers got out to an early lead in this one. Ended up being on the backs of quite a bit of luck in the third inning. Fifth inning, sorry. This was not really an early lead, I guess. It felt early in that game because the game went longer, but it was the 5th inning when they scored 4 runs. It started with a Bryce Terang chopper to third base. Tyler Black scored after replay, and it was very close, and I didn't know if they'd get it overturned, but he went with a headfirst dive. He kind of got cleated on his arm as he went in. We'll talk about Black plenty over the years and the months, I'm sure, but he's fun to watch. He plays really, really hard, which you have to respect. I think Cronenworth was getting annoyed with him because twice in this series, Black went flying into second base head first, one on a steal attempt and one on a sac fly tag up he was trying to make. He ended up being out on that one, but he went really hard into second, kind of right into Cronenworth's knees. So we'll have to watch that. I'm sure he won't be super well liked by some other players around the league, but he's fun to watch. He plays very hard, and you have to respect someone who does that. That chopper was followed up by a William Contreras ground ball single for a run, a Christian Yelich ground ball single for a run, and a Rhys Hoskins infield single for a run. Manny Machado made a diving stop down the line. It was almost a double and multiple runs scoring on it, but Machado made a diving stop, wasn't able to make a clean throw to first, so Hoskins, even with Hoskins' speed, was able to beat it out. So 4 runs, not much, barely leaving the infield, really. And then in the next half inning, Colin Ray allowed a 2-run homer to Luis Arias, which not exactly Arias' game, but he threw him a cutter in a spot where he could turn on it and hit it pretty hard. And then, as I mentioned, Jake Cronenworth followed that up with a homer of his own in the 6th inning. I was pretty surprised that Colin Ray was back out there in the 6th inning. I'm not going to lie. The contact had been pretty, like I said, it had been hard hit for most of the game, and letting him face the top of that order, and especially someone like Cronenworth a third time, just did not feel like a great decision. And Cronenworth did make him pay. Donovan Solano hit an RBI single to take the lead. Brewers tied it back up with a Sal Frelick fielder's choice, and then that wouldn't have scored the run, but Ha-Seong Kim tried to throw out Frelick at first and launch the ball past the first baseman to score Yelich all the way from second on that play. And then Hobie came in, a little bit of bad luck, I would say, but there was some solid contact in this one. It wasn't as bad luck as he had in some of these other outings. Him, Peguero, and Paredes, along with a Terang error, which was one of the unearned runs, allowed 4 runs in the final 2 frames, and that was the game. That was 9-5. final for that one. The Brewers, like I said, didn't really deserve to be in that one. I didn't think at the time. The offense had been pretty lucky to even put up 5 runs, but unfortunately, the pitching just really wasn't there. But really, in the first 3 games of the series, that was the theme. And with Game 3, this one ended up being 6-4. That score is a lot closer than what the game was actually played as for the majority of it. Carlos Rodriguez making another start, 4 innings, 6 hits, 4 earned, 2 strikeouts, no walks, and he gave up 2 home runs. Jack, I know you didn't really get a chance to watch this one, but he's just not ready yet, right? I mean, it seems pretty clear, and he did end up getting optioned a few days later. But what are your thoughts on him so far?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I didn't watch this start pitch to pitch, and that's usually what I try to do if I'm gonna evaluate pitching, obviously, or
Right.
honestly, if I'm just trying to evaluate anyone fairly, you wanna watch pitch to pitch as well as you can, just because there's so many little things that go on within the context
Yeah.
of a game, and it's good to know as much of that context as you can. But I'll just go based off of the previous outings before that, which I did watch. The command really just is not there right now. A good way to start is if you go and look on Savant at his heat maps right now for his pitches. I was actually looking at it after they announced the decision to option him down. And one of the first things that you'll see is the vast majority of his sinkers are located up in the zone as opposed to getting those pitches down a little bit more and then going up with the four seamer. So, not a great spot there. He's catching a lot of the plate with some of the secondaries as well. It's just he's not making good pitches that are going to be able to get guys out. I think that it's still way too early to make any conclusions about how the stuff plays against MLB hitters just because it's only been what has it been 3 outings, 3 starts
Yep.
for him.
Yep.
3 starts. That's and when you're looking at a sample like that, you can say, "Well, here's how the stuff played today," but you don't have enough of a sample to say, "Here's how the
Right.
stuff will play going forward," if that makes sense. Because again, it also comes down to, the stuff is probably gonna look like it's playing a lot better if he's executing pitches as well. Just you need a bigger sample, but you can tell in those 3 starts that some of the things you'd like to see, it's not quite there yet, and it does remind me a little bit of what we saw from Tobias Myers his first few
Yep.
starts in the big leagues where the results are really, really bad, battling the walks, battling the command, not executing pitches, and he was either missing by a lot or getting too much of the plate with 2 strike pitches. That was something that we saw in one of his starts early on. Went back down to Nashville. He wasn't even back in Nashville for a very long time. What it really more so came down to was just that he got the opportunity to work with guys. He worked with Chris Hook while he was up here in that first stint. I don't know if he really had time to do anything in Nashville when he got back down because he was called back up as an injury replacement shortly thereafter. But, it takes time. And then it can be just a couple starts and things start to click. It can be a little longer than that before things start to click, but nothing abnormal here for a young pitcher seeing the things that he's battled in his first few outings. And he has battled some of these things even in AAA this year where the
Oh yeah.
numbers are not great. So this guy's 22 years old. I think he'll figure it out. I do like the arsenal. I think for as much as everybody talks about the lack of a standout pitch, I don't think that's really gonna be too detrimental for him as he gains more experience. One of the comparisons that I was thinking of in my head was this feels a lot like Colin Ray without the experience that Colin Ray has
Yep.
benefited from, where it's the arsenal of kinda having the kitchen sink. None of the pitches grade out great. I would argue that his fastballs, though, grade out quite a bit better than Ray's fastballs because there's a little bit more velocity there. Also, he's got the flat vertical approach angle on the four-seam fastball. He's a
Hmm.
shorter guy who throws with a three-quarters arm slot. If you're locating that four-seamer up in the zone, it should play well up there, and you don't quite have that same effect for Ray, who's a taller guy. Doesn't have a high arm slot, but taller guy. Not quite the same movement profile either. But I do think that you get him a little bit more time to polish up in AAA. He's gonna get more big league starts up here this year, I'm pretty confident in that, and I think we're gonna see some good big league starts for him this year. It takes time. It takes time, and development's not linear. That's something we always have to keep in mind as well when you're
Yep.
just talking about the evolution of a young pitcher.
Yeah. And he had a pretty big adjustment period at AAA to start this year. Like you mentioned, he's 22. He was young for AAA. Most starters, position players tend to trend a little bit younger for debuts than starting pitchers do. Like 22 years old for a starting pitcher is pretty young. It's one of the younger debuts the Brewers have had recently. Freddie was one of the main outliers in that way because he was only 20, I believe, when he made his debut, maybe just 21. But yeah, I think he'll be fine. I have actually, I think, made that Colin Ray comparison before when I was talking about him in the minors. That's who he reminds me of. It's just a guy who's not as polished in terms of command and in terms of just knowing his game at this point because he's so young. So I'm with you on all of that. But back to game 3 and Rodriguez's results in this one. Jackson Merrill hit a 3-run homer, and then that was followed shortly after by a Ha-Seong Kim solo homer. He actually pitched pretty well the first time through, and that's kind of been a theme for him too. It seems like the second time guys have gotten an eye on his pitches is when he's gotten in trouble in the first 3 starts. So that makes you feel a little bit better too in terms of like, okay, when they haven't gotten this great locked in idea on what he's got, he had decent results, but the second time through has been really brutal for him in the 3 starts. But after that, Jacob Junis ended up making his return in this one. He went 3 innings, 2 strikeouts to no walks. His stuff looked pretty decent to me. Velo was a little bit down from where we saw it in that first outing against the Twins. That's not shocking based on what we saw in AAA, where it was down as well, but the stuff looked pretty decent. He did end up giving up a 2-run homer to Kyle Higashioka. That made it 6-0. And then in the 9th inning, the Brewers were able to load the bases. Bryce Terang with an opposite field grand slam, which I don't know that I ever anticipated any opposite field home runs from Bryce Terang in his entire career, but he did it. Actually clipped the building in left field, but that just ended up being a little bit too little, too late. Padres are up 3-0 in the series heading into game 4 after that 6-4 win. And the Brewers were able to kind of bloop and bleed their way to a win in game 4. 5-run second inning. There was really only one truly hard hit ball, which was Tyler Black hit an opposite field ground ball single to score the 5th run. Bryce Terang did have a triple. It was not hit super hard, but it was a ball that's going to be a hit every single time where he hit it. It wasn't cheap by any means, but that was really the only other semi-hard hit ball in that inning that went for a hit. And it was a lot of, I think Yelich's grounder up the middle for an RBI single was actually hit decently hard as well. But it was mostly ground balls sneaking through. Blake Perkins had a very, very funny looking 2-run single where he thought he hit a foul ball like into the stands behind him and then realized that it was going to fall in down the left field line, ended up scoring 2 runs. It was not, I don't think they deserved 5 runs, but they were able to put up 5, and the Brewers were in dire need of an inning like that. They were, the bats had been okay in the series, but it was nice to get out to a real early lead, and Tobias Myers was able to take advantage of that start. He ended up going only 5 innings, 5 hits, 1 earned run, 3 strikeouts to no walks. He was able to wiggle out of a little trouble in the 5th where he had an opportunity to maybe make it a game again, but he only ended up allowing 1 run. And after that, they decided to pull him. Pitch count was in pretty good shape, only 78 at the time, but I think Pat Murphy was very eager to close this one out with his bullpen with a chance to win a game in a series that had not gone well so far. And the bullpen was able to get the job done. Brian Hudson just doing what Brian Hudson does, 2 scoreless innings, 2 strikeouts, no runs. Yoel Payamps came into this one again. He only allowed 1 run. There was a lot of hard contact in this one again. He had a fly out to the wall, a couple hard hit outs outside of that. It was just not, it wasn't a great inning, but he limited it to 1 run. And in that spot, that was plenty fine, kept it at 6-2. And Trevor McGill came in a non-save opportunity to close this one out, which, again, pretty sure sign that Murph really wanted this one and just wanted to make sure nothing weird would happen. Kind of like almost happened in that Angels game in the series before. He said, nope, we're just going to close this out and take away our 1 win in the series. But I think we need to circle back to Tobias Myers here, Jack, and there's some stats. I mean, the numbers in June have been fantastic on the surface. He's 4-0, which, pitcher win record, whatever. But 4-0 means the Brewers won all 4 of his starts, no matter how you spin it. 25 1/3 innings, only 2 earned runs, 18 strikeouts to 6 walks, which is a solid ratio for sure. And then only 13 hits, which means the whip is well below 1 for the month. So What have you noticed from him in this month? And this is basically, it lines up with him returning from that minor league assignment that you were talking about. So what have you seen from him in June that's creating these much better results?
I think a lot of it's just getting flyouts with the fastball, with the four-seam fastball. If you look at some of the numbers that he's had in June, I don't think he's deserved 2 runs in 25 innings. I think that it's still been more of a mid to back rotation type performance, but really he's doing what he needs to do under this run prevention infrastructure, I guess you could say, that the Brewers have, which is a lot of times, honestly, this is a theme for a lot of guys. If you just throw strikes, we'll make plays behind you. And that just sounds like high school baseball dad coaching. And I never like to be the just throw strikes guy because more often than not, the game is way more complicated than that. You have to throw quality strikes as well. But like you look at what he's doing right now and you look at the team that's behind him, I think that's what a big part of it is. And he is throwing quality strikes too. He's locating the four seamer a lot better. He's had some outings where, in addition to just locating it, he's also done a good job spotting that four seamer to the glove side as well. And it seems like that's been a productive pitch for him. But you look at what that pitch has been doing for him this month, the results against it have been fantastic in terms of plate appearance outcomes. The expected outcomes would probably tell you it's more of an average pitch than a plus one in the way that it's been over this 4-start stretch. But one thing that stands out to me is how high the average launch angle has gotten on that pitch. The average launch angle against his four-seamer right now is 20 degrees at the time that we're recording this. And I haven't looked at the split for these last 4 starts, but I'd be willing to bet it's gone up over those last 4 starts because it really just seems like he's not necessarily always getting soft contact, but he's getting contact underneath the ball. He's getting swings underneath the ball. And that's really the whole idea behind throwing a four-seamer that's got a high induced vertical break like his does, because that ball is fighting against or resisting the effect of gravity as it's coming from hand to plate. You're going to get swings under it because that ball, essentially what's happening is that ball isn't moving downward as much as the hitter would naturally expect it to. And when that happens, and if you're a hitter and you're putting a normal swing on that ball and the ball is not dropping into your barrel, essentially, you're going to get swings under that. A lot of times it looks like swing and miss with the four-seamer. But in Myers' case, it's more fly balls, pop-ups. So just because you're not getting the swing and miss doesn't mean that that pitch isn't still behaving in the way you would like it to. If you're just getting the swings under the ball, especially with the outfield defense that the Brewers have, you've got a bunch of rangy guys out there on any given night. It's usually going to be one of Blake Perkins or Sal Frelick. You'll probably have Jackson Chourio in right. If Churio's not in right, then it's probably Perkins in center and Frelick in right. And then you have 2+ center fielders navigating those 2 spots. Christian Yelich is not a plus defender. I would argue he's okay still as an outfielder. I don't think he's hurting you out there, so that's not really a detriment for any of the pitchers. It's a good formula, and it's worked for a lot of pitchers so far. And I think that, not to steer this away from Tobias Myers, but it's a reason why they've kind of been able to plug and play some guys in that rotation a little bit. Like a big reason why the Brewers have been able to navigate all the injuries they have is because you have a unit that is constructed in such a way that you can put a lot of guys into that mix and just kind of say, all right, like pitch your game in the strike zone and we'll make some plays behind you, and that can help elevate your performance. And it's definitely helping Tobias Myers. But you look at the 6 walks in the 25 in the third innings, that's also big for him. We talked about how the command and the control were not good for him early on, but he's really corrected that. He's made some mechanical adjustments just to get into the back leg a little bit more to be more consistent. If you watch him pitch over this stretch as well, I believe he made the adjustment a start or two before this run started, but he's doing a stutter step now as he goes into his windup. So he's made some mechanical adjustments as well. And really what's happened is it's elevated him into a capable MLB starter, which is what I always thought was something that was in there. I projected him to be more of an impact player out of the bullpen this year, but he did have the starter's arsenal. I was just kind of curious how the velocity would play as a starting pitcher, and it hasn't been great, but it's been enough. I think if he did throw harder, you would see more of the swings and misses
Oh, yeah.
compared to what he's gotten so far. But the way the Arsenal's constructed, the way he's executing his pitches, and then also the defense behind him, it's all combining into this package of making him a really effective starter. He's obviously not going to maintain this output. I don't think he's going to maintain the low threes ERA that he's got so far. He's riding a very, very low batting average on balls of play. I think it's like 240, which is probably not going to continue. You're going to have some of those balls finding gaps a little bit more often than they have so far. But I think if I had to ascribe a true talent type performance to what Tobias Myers has done for the Brewers just so far this year, it's definitely in that range of capable number 4, maybe.
Mhm.
I think number 4, maybe number 5. And then you put the defense behind him, that kind of elevates everything up a little bit. And it kind of matches the whole construction of this Brewers rotation, really, minus Freddie Peralta, just a lot of guys with 4 or 5 type stuff. They go out there, they do what they're asked to do, and that plays into the system that the Brewers have, and everybody comes out happy. So good for Tobias Myers for what he's been able to do. Good for the Brewers that they've been able to get this kind of production out of him. He's been a big boost to a rotation that needs some innings.
Yeah. 100%. Definitely in agreement with you. I think even we talked about it off screen before, but like the pop-ups are a big part of it too. It's at 11% of his fly balls this month have been pop-ups, which
That's
pop-ups
for
are
the year, not for
Oh,
this
that is
month.
for the year?
That's
I
for
thought
the
that was
year.
in the
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's even better then.
Mhm.
That's a pretty high number. I was looking, I think it might be the same for the month actually, because I was just looking at it. But either way, a lot of pop-ups, and pop-ups are, I would say, next to strikeouts, the most it would be almost impossible to not get an out on a pop-up, short of a huge mistake from an infielder for the most part. So pop-ups to me are almost undervalued. People who can generate that type of like contact, it's an easy out. It's almost, to me, it's better than a ground ball, which obviously I don't think that's up for debate, but I think that's played a big role. And you talked about all the reasons why that's happened. But yeah, I think Tobias Myers is going to be, I think he's found what he needs to do. And if he can just keep it up, like you said, these results are not going to hold. He's not going to have a 0.71 ERA or whatever it's been in June just by continuing to pitch the same way he is. But it definitely feels like a guy who's really helped solidify this rotation. And he's pretty much solidified himself a spot in the rotation for the foreseeable future, I would imagine, in this season at least. So a good way to finish out that series. And Jack, I'm going to pass it back to you because you got to watch this Rangers series that we're going to talk about.
Indeed, I did. So we're going to move on to the Brewers coming back home after their West Coast trip, and they started in grand fashion, sweeping the defending World Series champions at home in 3 games. We're going to break down the action from this series, but first, kind of going into it, just looking at the way this series was going to shake out for the Brewers with the matchups and kind of where everybody was at as a team, both of these teams. I didn't really think this was an automatic win series. I thought this had the potential to be a little bit of a trap series, so to speak, where maybe not the Brewers necessarily would think this way, but people kind of following the Brewers and watching the Brewers
Yeah.
would think, "Oh, this should be an easy win. You know, if we don't take this series, we're not doing our job as a team." I mean, you look at at Texas's record, they've definitely underperformed this year. A lot of bats in that lineup have underperformed, but at the same time, it's still largely the same core that won a World Series last year, and they were coming off of 4 straight wins going into this series, including a sweep of the Royals. You also had matchups against Michael Lorenzen and Nathan Eovaldi in this series on the pitching side, 2 guys who have thrown the ball extremely well this year. So going in, I was kind of like, this could be a series where the Brewers don't have a very good showing and everyone kind of gets up in arms about it. But the Brewers got the job done. They swept the Rangers in that 3-game series, starting with game 1. They took that one by a score of 6-3. Story in this one was a Rhys Hoskins go-ahead grand slam in 6th inning. That was part of a 5-run inning. So that inning started with Lorenzen allowing a leadoff double to William Contreras. Lorenzen was throwing the ball really well up to that point, but after that leadoff double, Bruce Bochy went to the bullpen. Left-hander Jacob Latz came in. He walked Christian Yelich and Willie Adames, and that brought up Hoskins with the bases loaded. He got a first pitch fastball, clubbed it to left field. Brewers have the lead. Good moment for Reese, too, who's really
Yeah.
struggled since coming back from the injured list about a month ago. But nice to see him get a big swing and get a nice moment there. I do also want to touch on that Willie Adames walk. He was down 0-2 and worked it back and was able to get himself on base. So really nice job by him. Even that Yelich at bat as well got to 2
Yep.
strikes, and he worked a very long plate appearance to get on base there. So nice job by both of those guys ahead of Reese getting on base and putting him into that big spot. Andrew Monasterio would add a final run in that 6th inning on a bloop single. That was the stoink to end all stoinks, is what I think I called it. That thing was hit like 65 miles an hour off the bat, and he just plopped it perfectly into shallow center. So good for Milwaukee getting a nice inning there. And I think that was kind of just a sigh of relief for a lot of people, seeing as the Brewers had some struggles lately with runners in scoring position, or had some struggles with not getting the big hit when they needed it, or just hitting for some power too, to kind of have that big swing to swing the momentum in a game. That's something that they've been lacking a little bit as well lately. And I don't think that's really a product of any approach changes or anything. I think it's just ebbs and flows of an offense, ebbs and flows of a season, but always good to see one of those big swings come back. And there's never a bad moment for it. Freddie Peralta got the ball in this one, getting the start. 5 innings for him, 4 hits, 2 earned runs, 2 walks, and 6 Ks. Pat Murphy said this was a very good outing and he liked what he got from Freddie. I don't know, man. This comes back to what we talk about a lot, so I'm not going to hammer it too much, but 5 innings on 104 pitches.
Yeah.
You got to be more efficient than that. He was navigating a little bit of traffic throughout the night. Again, just extending at bats that he didn't need to because he was getting ahead on guys, not making the most competitive 2-strike pitches. He had a couple in this one where I thought he actually did make some good 2-strike pitches and they just fouled it back, and that prolonged it a little bit. So that's part of it. And like I always say, Freddie's never going to be super efficient just because he's always been essentially a 3 true outcomes pitcher, where it's either going to be a strikeout, a walk, or a home run. And the strikeouts and the walks in particular are going to raise your pitch count because you're not getting any quick plate appearances when those are the outcomes that you're experiencing the most often. But still, you can do better than 104 pitches in 5 innings. So take what you got from Freddie Peralta in that one. It certainly wasn't a bad start. Like if 5 innings and 2 runs is what I'm getting from him more often than not, I really can't complain. But again, he's the ace of the staff. You're hoping for a little bit more just in terms of volume and efficiency. Maybe it's a little nitpicky, but I think it's still a fair thing to say, just given where he's at. But we won't touch on it too much longer. Some highlights from this game: Jared Koenig got himself into a bases loaded jam in the 7th inning. 3 walks for him to load the bases. He was getting squeezed a little bit on some calls. He also had some as well where even if it was a ball that barely missed. Like he threw 198-mile-an-hour fastball that was on the black, or caught the black of the plate, but it was by the strike zone definition or the rule book strike zone. It probably was just off the plate and it got called the ball. So I don't think he pitched poorly, or as poorly as 3 walks might indicate. It's not like he was all over the place, but he got out of it with a strikeout, his 2nd of the inning. So nice work by him. He's really become a big part of the bullpen. He would again be a factor later in this series, in the series finale. Game 2, the Brewers winning more of a low-scoring affair in this one, 3-1. Hobie Milner opened for Bryce Wilson in this one. Pat Murphy wanting him out there to face some of the lefties at the top of that Texas Rangers order. You got Corey Seager, Josh Smith, Nathaniel Lowe is in there as well. He's more middle of the order, but another left-handed bat as well. And ironically, Hobie retired every right-handed batter he faced and allowed 2 hits to 3 of the left-handed batters he faced, including the first inning where he gave up back-to-back hits to Seager and Smith to put the Rangers on top 1-0. But I still think this was the right call for opening this game. Koenig probably not available to open after a stressful outing the evening before. I know we've talked a little bit about some of the lackluster results Hobie's had of late. I still trust him for the most part, especially in a matchup where you have lefties coming up. Like, fact of the matter is, he still gives lefties one of the tougher looks in baseball, just with the angles and the movement and all this stuff. So I'd still trust him in that spot. Ironically, it didn't work out against the lefties, but the Brewers were still in a spot to win this game, and they would end up coming back. We'll talk about Wilson first, though, pitching as the bulk guy today. This might have been one of his best outings of the year. Statistically, it probably was, but also in terms of how he threw the ball, one of his best outings of the year. 6 innings for him, 3 hits allowed, and 4 strikeouts. One thing that stands out to me, no walks. That was the first time in a bulk outing, so to speak, that he hasn't walked a guy. He had a couple short relief outings where he hadn't walked a guy, but this is his first bulk outing in which he did not issue a walk. And that is largely been a pretty good barometer of how well Bryce Wilson's day is going to go. How many guys is he walking? He's had a couple of bulk outings in which he did get pretty lucky with walking a lot of guys, and then there were some screamers hit at guys. I keep going back to that Cardinals start he had a while back. He just did not pitch well in that one and skated by with a couple of runs in 4 innings, I think it was. But in this one, did a really good job executing the no walks. Cutter was a really effective pitch for him. He had 5 whiffs out of 11 swings. That's a 45% whiff rate. The average exit velocity against it was 83.5 miles an hour. So getting both the swing and miss and the weak contact with that pitch. I asked him just why that was working so well for him in that start and just kind of how he thought it was playing with the rest of the arsenal. He said he thought he was able to get a little bit more downward tilt on that pitch to get some swing and miss and avoid some barrels as well. Said he thought he did a really good job of tunneling it with the sinker, starting both of those pitches in the same slot. And then one is going to be going into a righty and the other one's going to be going away from a righty, sinker in, cutter away. Just felt really good about how he threw the ball, and he should because he did throw the ball well in this one. So good for him. On the offensive side, Jackson Chourio brought the Brewers back into this one with a game-tying RBI single in the third. That made it 1-1. Joey Ortiz hitting a solo home run in the 5th to give the Brewers a 2-1 lead. And then Rhys Hoskins with an insurance run via an RBI single in the 7th inning. We're going to talk now, before we get into Game 3, about some roster news that happened before that game. Technically, this was announced before Game 2. The Brewers acquiring veteran left-handed pitcher Dallas Keuchel from the Seattle Mariners in exchange for cash considerations. Keuchel arrived during the second game of that Rangers series, and then he spoke to all of us in the clubhouse afterward. But the Brewers just needing some innings in that rotation. It was always going to be a matter of time before they finally went external to try to plug some of those innings, and this is kind of a why not move? Like, there's no reason not to try it. You didn't give up anything to acquire Keuchel. Kind of reminds you of the Julio Teheran acquisition from last year, where you plug a veteran guy into that spot and just kind of see what happens. And I guess we'll talk about kind of what happened in Game 3 in a couple minutes here. But additional roster moves that were made before Game 3, Gary Sanchez was sent to the 10-day injured list with a left calf strain. He had been scratched from the lineup in Game 2. So Eric Haas had his contract selected. He is now serving as the backup catcher. Joel Kuhnel was DFA'd to clear a 40-man spot for Dallas Keuchel. I know that breaks Spencer's heart. Spencer was a big fan of Joel Kuhnel, who at least didn't get to pitch for the Brewers in this stint, which lasted, was it like 24 hours? He was only up here for like one.
Yes, it was one day.
It was one day.
It was one game.
1 or 2, but I knew it was brief. So, yeah. Spencer, do you have any parting words for Joel Kuhnel?
No, I've been working on like an hour-long tribute video for him, but we'll release that at a separate day. No, I do
all the Nashville highlights in it.
Yep, all 5 innings he pitched. No, I wouldn't be shocked if he passes through waivers. I hope he does, because I actually do. I do find him pretty interesting, and I think he could eventually have helped the Brewers, but I also understand what is going on with the roster. And it would be kind of tough for him to take up a 40-man spot currently. Kind of sucks that he ended up having to get put on the 40-man for one day and then immediately DFA'd, because he had an option left. So I was kind of just hoping he'd get sent down. But I don't think I'm going to be either way. I don't think we're going to be missing him too badly, but just a guy that I thought was interesting. And he didn't really strike anyone out at AAA with the Blue Jays, I believe, is who he started the year with. And then in 5 innings, he had struck out 8 with the Brewers. And I was like, I think they figured out what it is. He's got good stuff. He's got interesting stuff, at least. So it's okay. I'll get over it. It's funny how close Keuchel and Keuchel are in spelling too, so that caused some confusion for some people I saw on Twitter. And yeah, it was a Keuchel for Keuchel, and we can just get into Game 3 and talk about what we saw out of Dallas.
Yeah, we'll do that right now. Game 3, the Brewers winning this one in walk-off fashion, 6-5. Dallas Keuchel, as we're talking about, making his Brewers debut the day after they traded for him. That allowed Milwaukee to push the rest of their starting rotation back to the Cubs series. Also just gives everyone a couple more days because you had the off day on Thursday as well. As soon as the Brewers acquired Keuchel and then switched their probables for Game 3 to TBA, we all kind of had an idea of like, they're probably going to start Keuchel in this one because he was lined up to pitch on regular rest for this game. So he got the ball, went 4 innings against the Rangers, 8 hits allowed, 5 earned runs, a walk, 4 strikeouts, 2 homers allowed. So Keuchel is generally never going to be a swing and miss merchant. He only had 5 whiffs out of 18 swings, but that's really nothing out of the ordinary. Even the good version of Dallas Keuchel from a few years back was not a swing and miss enthusiast, or enthusiast isn't the right word, but a swing and miss specialist, maybe. I think any pitcher would like to get strikeouts. So I'm sure Dallas Keuchel's very enthused when he gets some swings and misses, but that's generally not his game, and it wasn't in this one either. So that's not surprising, but he is historically a heavy ground ball pitcher, and that's going to be where he makes his money. Only 31% of the contact he got in this start was a ground ball. There were a lot of hard hit line drives, obviously some hard hit fly balls too, to give up the 2 home runs. A 56% hard hit rate in this start, and the average exit velocity on batted balls against Dallas Keuchel in this game was 96.9 miles an hour. So he and the Brewers kind of took a more of a glass half full approach. And to be fair, you did see some moments, especially in that first inning, where he was actually spotting the ball pretty well and he was getting some called strikes. I believe he got a couple whiffs on the changeup. You can check me on that if I'm wrong.
He for sure got one for the strikeout.
Yeah. And it's I do still like the shape of the sinker and the shape of the changeup, but the reality is he got hit hard, man. He got hit hard. This was not a good start. Like, I don't like to say that, but just objectively looking at this was a bad start. And I know you can talk about him getting out of some trouble in that second inning before things got worse because he escaped the bases loaded with nobody out after he gave up a couple, and then the bases are still loaded with nobody out, and then he got out of the inning. But I don't even think it was bad execution either per se all the time. They hit what he was throwing.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of all you can say. And he did say post-game, like, there's not too many pitches I would take back in terms of how I executed them. And I think he's right. They just hit it.
That's almost the most concerning part, right?
Yeah. Like when you're making a pitch and guys are just punishing it. And granted, this is only start number 1. So it kind of goes back to what we talked about with Carlos Rodriguez. There's a line in a small sample between, we're just going to say, the stuff clearly did not play in this start. They hit him hard. And then you can say that without saying that doesn't mean we're going to make or pretend that we know how the stuff is going to play. You can make a prediction based on how the stuff is going to play, based on just like the movement numbers and the shape and the velocity and all these things that we know. Like, that's what that stuff is for making the prediction. But you don't know for sure until you get a little bit of a bigger sample, and then you can really start to feel confident and you can say, okay, now we know how it plays, not saying here's how we think it could play or here's how it played in this outing. But in the context of this outing, the stuff did not play.
No,
it got
not
hit.
at all.
And that's unfortunate. It's obviously only the first outing, so this is not to say that this is what every start is going to look like for Dallas Keuchel, but not an encouraging start.
No, and I think even though he did execute decently, like we talked about, I do think it's kind of unfair to not acknowledge that it was probably a bit of a whirlwind for him, all of this happening in basically a day, and he has to fly in and do a physical and do all this stuff, and then you're on the mound the next day, and it's a day game after a night game, and you just got in. Like, there's a lot of stuff that happens here, so it definitely is not going to be, you can't just say it's a predictive thing for his future as a Brewer here, but the first outing did not go well, and that much hard contact we have not seen since maybe the likes of Eric Lauer's worst outings as a Brewer. I mean, it was just, he was getting hit around. 5 earned runs probably isn't even what he deserved for how they were hitting the ball. So in the end, we'll definitely take it because the offense was able to pick him up. But yeah, we'll see where it goes. But there are a lot of factors here, I think, that we have to keep in mind, and not just like Jack said, there it can't just be, okay, well, he had a bad first start, he's just gonna suck now. Like, that's not, we can't take it that direction.
Yeah, and I do think there is a path for him to not, be great or anything, but to have success in the sense of do the job the Brewers need him to do. Like, if you get 6, maybe 7 starts out of Dallas Keuchel with a 4.5 ERA, like, that's a big win. And I
Yeah.
think that's gotta be what you're hoping for if you're the Brewers, and I think there is a path to that. I kinda wrote about it a little bit after they announced the move. He still gets a lot of ground balls most of the time. Like, the 31% ground ball rate in this outing was out of the ordinary. He's been really, really bad results-wise since 2021. Even during that stretch, his ground ball rate has been over 50%. So I don't think we're
Yep.
gonna see as many line drives as we did in this start. So I'm not really gonna hold that against him long term because, again, it's just one outing. And if he's getting the ground balls, he's always gonna be fine on that kind of contact. What stands out to me, though, is so it's kinda looking through the batted ball splits. I don't think that's actually where he stands to benefit the most from being a Brewer. His results on ground balls the last however many years it's been since 2021, his last 3 years in the big leagues, I guess, his results on ground balls have been fine. And it's actually been right in line with the results that Brewers pitchers have had on ground balls this year. The problem is that he's statistically been, you can make a case that he has been the worst pitcher in baseball in that span on contact that is not a ground ball. Like, if that ball is not hit on the ground, it's just getting smoked and there's a ton of damage being done. A lot of it just is the kind of contact they're making on those batted balls because the expected numbers are still near the bottom of the league on line drives and fly balls. But I think you do kind of hope that if you have that really rangy outfield out there,
Yeah.
that Blake Perkins or Sal Frelick or Jackson Churio, whoever, can maybe run a couple more of those down. And if you're saving maybe a few doubles here and there, like, that can add up to improve the results quite a bit. So I think that's part of it. The other part of it too, I think, comes back to pitch mix. He needs to throw a lot of sinkers
Yes.
because the sinker does still get a lot of ground balls, and that's what he needs to do. He needs to get that ground ball rate as high as he possibly can. He's never going to strike anyone out. I wouldn't even really care so much in his case about changing timing or different looks. Like, I think you have to lean a little bit more into, yeah, guys know a sinker is coming. I just need to make sure the movement is so good that they're going to pound it into the ground anyway.
Yep.
Like, he does not have a good enough arsenal at this stage of his career where I think he can effectively mix pitches and that's going to work. Like, it quite literally needs to be closer to, yeah, everyone probably knows what I'm going to throw here. Big deal. You do have the changeup too as well, though, so that's really going to be where the change of pace is coming from.
Yep.
But I guess I'm talking more in the sense of, like, he should not be throwing a lot of cutters at all. Like, you can make the case that, oh, well, having the movement to the glove side is good to play off the results against the cutter have been really, really bad. That's where the vast majority of his loud contact has come over the last 3 years in the big leagues, and it wasn't an amazing pitch in AAA either, if I'm remembering correctly,
No.
with the Tacoma Raiders in Seattle's system. It's literally just gotta be, here's a ton of sinkers and changeups. I'm not necessarily trying to fool you. I'm just trying to do everything I can to make sure that you're a little bit out in front or you're rolling over the top of the ball, whatever it is. Like, I'm not playing tricks on you here or anything. I'm not gonna Colin Ray this where I'm gonna mix and match 85 different pitch types. Like, it's just gotta kinda be, here it is. We all know what's coming. I just gotta make sure that everything is located well enough, and then that maybe that balance of sinker and changeup is good enough that you're out in front of it just enough. I'm just missing the barrel, and then from that, defense is going to do all the work behind me. I think that's got to be what the path to success here is.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah, we'll see how well it works. First start, obviously not encouraging, but he's going to make more than one start for the Brewers, so we'll see how everything unfolds. I am curious because, like I said, it's where we're at with this. First start was really bad. It was really bad, and I think we can leave it there. We'll see what happens moving forward because I do still think there is a way to make it work. It's just a matter of if it's going to, and nobody knows for sure. But there's no harm in giving it a shot, given where the Brewers are at in terms of the need for innings, what it costs to get a guy like this. We'll see how it pans out. Fortunately, like we touched on, the Brewers were able to give Keuchel the run support he needed in that first start. Once again, the Brewers hitting a grand slam in this series. This game, it was Jake Bauers in the third inning. And again, it was set up by Willy Adames falling behind 0-2 and drawing a walk to load the bases. So another really nice plate appearance by Willy Adames, who, by the way, has been quite a bit more selective at the plate than he has in past seasons. This is the first year since 2019 that his chase rate has been lower than the MLB average, usually swinging somewhat wildly at pitches outside of the strike zone, especially in counts like that. That's kind of been the bugaboo for him, and it's been something that's capped his offense the last few years. It's caused low on base percentages, just has kind of limited him to being a hitter whose value is derived primarily from his power. Now we're seeing a little bit more balance, and it all kind of comes back to he's not chasing as many pitches. So good for him being a little bit more selective. It's an approach that's definitely helped him and both helped the Brewers lineup. Just you kind of look at these games in particular, too. There are multiple ways now that he can help this team offensively. Jackson Chourio hitting an inside the park home run in the fourth. This one was scored as an inside the park home run. No error on the play. It was a line drive to center. Center fielder made the questionable decision to dive for it, and it got under him and skirted past him, rolled to the wall, and Chourio going home to home for the second time in as many weeks. Nathan Eovaldi got the start for Texas in this one. The Brewers, again, doing that damage off of him. They scored the 5 runs on 9 hits. But at the same time, I think they kind of let him off the hook a little bit because he still went 7 innings on 101 pitches. And granted, part of that is he did a really good job of just pounding the strike zone.
Yeah.
Like if you have a guy who's in the strike zone that much, there's only so much you can do in terms of working counts because if he's in the strike zone, you got to swing. But still, 7 innings on 101 pitches, given the 9 hits and the 5 runs, I think there was still some room to maybe make him work a little bit more. So it's going to sound like I'm nitpicking a 5-run showing against a very good starter, and maybe I am, but I don't know. I think that as far as 5-run showings go, from a process standpoint, it maybe could have been a little bit better is what I'm trying to get at here.
Yeah.
And that's I'm a big evaluate the process guy, and that probably is going to come off as nitpicking a lot of the times, but that's the way I look at it, and apparently people want to listen to what I have to say, so I'll say that. But the Brewers bullpen doing a really nice job in this one. Jacob Junis, Brian Hudson, Yoel Piamps, Trevor McGill, and Jared Koenig combining for 6 scoreless innings out of the bullpen. That kept the game tied at 5, and it set up Andrew Monasterio's walk-off single in the 10th. Monasterio, by the way, entering this game as a replacement for Joey Ortiz. We'll talk about the minor injury that he's been dealing with a little bit later. But I thought it was kind of fitting that Monasterio, a guy who has not gotten a lot of opportunities this year, having to come in for someone who is dealing with an injury and then being the one to deliver the game-winning hit. It just really seemed on brand and a good way to encapsulate the success the Brewers have had this year, because it's been mostly on the pitching side, but it's been there nonetheless where you've had guys dropping like flies, and at every turn so far, guys have come in and they've stepped up enough to the point where the Brewers can just kind of keep rolling along. So it was fun to see that happen on the offensive side today, but it just really seemed like it kind of fit into what we've seen from this team a lot this year. But a great moment for Andrew Monasterio, just a really well-minded ball player, I guess is the way I'll put it. He knows what his role is. He's always got a really good demeanor too. Pat Murphy said this post-game. He's got a smile on his face every day, and we see that too. You know, he's happy to be here, happy to contribute in any way he can. And interestingly, as we were talking to him post-game, he talked about how his first at-bat when he initially pinch hit for Ortiz against Eovaldi, he was late on a fastball from Eovaldi that he fouled back. He got hit by a pitch on a curveball later in the plate appearance that he reached. But knowing that he was late, he said he went back to the dugout between innings, kind of looked at some stuff, made some adjustments to make sure that he would be on time in his next at bat. And that's probably not that out of the ordinary. Like, guys make adjustments all the time. It's a big part of the game. But it's still cool to me to hear that even the guy who hasn't gotten a chance to play a whole lot is still ready for that situation, and he's ready
Yep.
to make adjustments, and he's very clearly engaged with the game. You got to give him credit for that. It's a good for Andrew Monasterio.
Yeah. I think, like you said, it kind of fits with the whole theme of the season for the Brewers, which is people step up. And like you said, it hasn't been on the offensive side too much. Reese missed some time. Yelich missed some time. I wouldn't say anyone really filled their like absence super well in that time, but they held
Jake
up.
Bauers got really
Bauers
hot
got hot. That's
out.
true.
Like
That is true.
Bauers, the one really hot stretch he had did line up with when Reese was out. So
That is
I
true.
think that's one you can point to.
Yeah. And I guess you could argue when Yelich was out, Contreras was going crazy and kind of making up for missing somebody in the lineup like that too. So it's just kind of they've been able to make up for people being out. On the pitching side, it really shows, but I think it's been there on the offensive side. And like you said, Monasterio, I think back to his debut last year, and I remember he struck out in the at bat, and they showed him in the dugout, and he had the biggest smile in the world after. Like, he was just so happy to be in the major leagues that he didn't seem to care that he struck out. He didn't seem to care what happened. Like, and then he got really hot for a stretch last year and was kind of a fun player and an important part to that team. But this year he's been a little up and down from AAA. He's been up for a while now, and he's barely played, like you said. And just to be able to be prepared to step in that spot due to an injury and get the job done, I mean, it's impressive. It's hard to do. I've been a guy, even at the D3 college level, you don't play for a few games even, and you're like, you get into a game and it just feels like you don't know where you are. You're kind of spinning, like everything's just sped up on you because you just haven't seen that game action recently. And to be able to do that in that spot and come up with the huge hit with 2 outs, I mean, that was a cool moment. You could tell the team was super excited for him too. Like, you can tell he has a good relationship with his teammates because they were all even more excited than a walk-off might normally imply in terms of just celebration and everybody going up to him. And Frelick was out there real quick, ready to basically tackle him. I mean, that was a cool moment. One of my favorites of the year, honestly.
So, good series for the Brewers. Really nice bounce back from a little bit of a rough finish to that West Coast trip. With that, we're now going to move on to some loose ends and some listener questions that we received for the week. We're going to start with Michael, who asked us on Twitter, can Sal Frelick turn himself into Bryce Terang at the plate? I don't know if he will, but I think that needs to be the path to success for him. So to kind of give a little bit more context to this question, really what's made Bryce Terang now a solid MLB hitter this year, like not even solid, I'm probably shortchanging him a little bit. It's still been a well above average slash line this year. I haven't looked at where the WRC plus is at, but I'd be willing to bet it's probably still around 130 or something if he's sitting on like a high 700s OPS in this year's offensive climate. You can look it up and then you can tell me what it is while I continue answering the question. What is it?
I'm looking it up right now.
You're looking it up?
It is. Nope. Keep talking.
Okay. But basically, the reason that Terang has gotten to that level is because he's just leaned into what he's good at and he's stopped trying to get value from an area that just isn't part of his game. He knows he's not a power threat, but he knew that he could be a high on base, contact oriented guy. Not just contact oriented, but productive enough contact, like to the point that, you know, you're making that much contact. And if enough of it is line drives that you're kind of shooting to the outfield or even ground balls that you can leg out for hits, you're going to get on base a lot. Essentially what it is he's avoiding fly balls. He's avoiding fly balls and strikeouts. Those are going to be the two biggest bugaboos for a guy like Bryce Terang. And it's a similar story for Sal Frelick. I will say that maybe my expectations were a little too high for Sal Frelick. Or maybe more so what it was is I think I thought Frelick's floor was higher than it has in reality turned out to be. I really thought that just the the really good plate discipline and the bat to ball meant that even though the lack of power was always a little bit of a concern as a prospect, that at the very least he'd come up here and be a league average hitter. He's been a few ticks below the league average, both in his rookie season and during this year. And although he might be closing in on a league average slash line after the 3 hits he had, I believe it was in that series finale against the Rangers or game 2 or whichever game it was where he had the 3 hits.
I can give you numbers on him and Turang now.
Yeah.
I
Why
got
don't you do that? Because I'm a big fan of, let's make sure we have the numbers here if at all possible,
Yep.
so we're giving people correct information instead of.
Yeah. So Turang is up to a 118, or he's at a 118 WRC plus.
Okay, so
his
I maybe overshot a little bit, but
his slash is 288, 354, 409. So it's over 8 or 750 still, and 760 really. I guess it's in the 760s. And then for Frelick, it is 269, 342, 343, which is a 99 WRC plus.
okay.
So he
So
is pretty
we'll
much to a league average now, but yeah.
Yeah, but so I guess what I was thinking is that the floor for him would be a little bit higher than it's maybe turned out to be, but really just the biggest detriment for him is he's not hitting the ball hard. He's making just a lot of contact that is not productive. I think that Frelick too, Spencer, if you have it up in front of you, I'd be willing to bet his expected weighted on base average, his StatCast expected outcomes are a lot worse than the actual outcomes that he's had, because StatCast hates him for the lack of loud contact.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. His expected weighted on base is 283, and he's at 309.
Yeah. So that's a huge gap. And I would probably be inclined to say that with the kind of contact he's made, he's probably closer to that than he is to the league average line that he's sitting on. Or even if you call it in the middle, that's a below average hitter. But yeah, I think that's got to be the way he just goes about it. And I actually think that for him, there's less of a transition to really having that kind of profile, because Frelick's swing right now is shorter than Turang's was as a rookie. And I'm saying that off of the eye test because we don't have StatCast bat tracking for last year. But I'd be willing to bet that Frelick's swing already is shorter than Turang's was as a rookie. Turang's swing got really long at times in 2023. But yeah, I think you're right. Like, this, can Sal Frelick turn himself into that? I do think he can. Is it going to happen this year? I don't know. But I do think that needs to kind of be the mold for him moving forward. I don't know what you think, Spencer.
Yeah, I was going to say very similarly. I think that's the goal, right? I mean, I don't think we're going to see it this year, or at least I don't think he's going to get up to the results Turang has currently this year. I think you could start seeing those adjustments being made. And honestly, this series, the 3 hits against the Rangers in that last game, I thought were some of his better swings. I think we've started to see a little bit harder contact lately. In the Padres series, he had the ground rule double at 101, I believe. A couple other triple-digit line drives, not grounders, which is nice to see from him. I honestly, so this is just, again, this is an eye test thing, but most of the year, I felt like he's almost trying to get into his legs too much. It looks like he's ending up on one knee or close to it a lot in his swing. And when I watch his best swings from the minor leagues, he was staying pretty tall. And I noticed that that's what's happened on a lot of these hits recently. So I wonder if he did make a bit of an adjustment there and he's purposely trying to stay a little bit taller. I think he's popped up a decent amount this year, and that's really, again, not a good thing for Sal Frelick at all. I would rather have a chopper than a pop-up for him easily. And really, fly balls are completely meaningless for Frelick, too. Any fly ball is pretty much being caught unless he hits it so soft it falls in front of an outfielder. So seeing him get into some more line drives, seeing him break triple digits in the exit velo a little bit more often it's really just these 2 series, but it does look to me, and this is, again, mostly eye test, but it looks to me like a little bit more like the guy I saw a lot in the minors. So it's giving me a little bit of hope that maybe he's making some changes, but it definitely feels like that's exactly what he needs to do, is just try to be Bryce Turang in your own way with your own swing and your own approach, but try to be what Bryce Turang is. And that's line drives, fighting off close pitches, being on time for pitches, and not trying to elevate. And we've actually seen Turang run into a few recently because he's just taking good swings and letting it play out. And I think that's how it should happen for these types of guys. If you're trying to hit for power in that type of with that type of profile, it's not going to happen. You're just going to pop up, or you're going to have rough swings and a lot of broken bats and all that type of stuff. So hopefully we're seeing him turn the corner a little bit, but Terang should definitely be the goal.
That kind of, what you just said kind of leads me into another point, I guess, that just kind of popped into my head. Like you said, we're seeing, ironically, more power from Terang when he's not trying to hit for power. And I think that comes back to, even if you're not the strongest guy, if you have an approach that locks your timing in,
Mm-hmm.
even if you're not super strong or putting as much power behind the ball as a lot of guys, like if you're catching that ball out in front in the right spot with the barrel, you're still probably going to make pretty decent contact with it. And that's probably a good way to kind of separate out the biggest difference between like the power guys and these kind of guys. The power guys can also hit home runs on pitches where they're not always doing that.
Yep.
But if you're someone who just doesn't have the kind of strength those guys do, and you're having those slightly, let's say, slightly off swings more often, that's really got no chance of being productive for you. So, like what Terang is doing now is he's getting himself just into a better position now where he's getting the barrel to the ball more. He's just getting the ball in a good spot. And sometimes just by doing that, you can actually hit for a little bit more power when you're not trying to. And I'm not saying that everyone should try that approach because it isn't going to work for everybody. Again, like a lot of these power guys also happen to be bigger guys. So you're not going to quite have the same level of control over your levers that you might have if you're a Bryce Terang, if you're a Sal
Mm-hmm.
Frelick. So then it makes more sense to just use the raw strength to your advantage. But in the case of Terang and now Frelick, like that's, you actually might have a chance of tapping into more loud contact if this is just the kind of approach that you have.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely how anybody with that type of profile has to approach things.
Yeah, for sure. We'll move on to our next question now. This one comes from Tyler. He asks, who is the leading in-house candidate to bring the energy to this team post Willie Adames era next year? Watching the post game where Churio ushered the Gatorade bath on Monasterio makes me think it's him as he gains more and more confidence, but curious on your thoughts. I don't know if it's going to be Churio right away just because he's still so young. Maybe you could throw William into that camp because I think that as the young catcher who has just become a very big part of everything the Brewers are about, I think he's part of that. I wouldn't describe him as a huge energy guy in quite the same ways that Willie is, but you can tell that he's become a leader on the team, and I think that's
Mm-hmm.
what really matters. I think Freddie Peralta is also kind of a dark horse candidate for that. I think we've talked about it a little bit before. You don't always see it like on the broadcasts or maybe even always if you're watching a game, but everybody in the Brewers clubhouse and on the Brewers staff keeps bringing him up as a guy who's really taken on a leadership role this year.
Yeah.
So I think he's a good guy too. It's a little different though because he's a starting pitcher and he's only on the field every 5 days. So I think there is something to that as well. It can be naturally easier for a position player to kind of take on role of the clubhouse guy, but it is a group effort. Like you need a lot of guys who are good clubhouse people to have the kind of culture that the Brewers have been able to build. So it's never just going to be one guy, but if you're talking about the guy who is kind of seen as the face of what the Brewers are about and the face of the clubhouse energy, I think Williams a candidate, but I do Freddie too. I think Freddie's going to be very much a big part of it as well, especially because he's got a couple of years left on that deal that he's on. So I think those
Yeah.
are the two names I'll throw out there. I don't know if you have any others.
No, those are the two I have written down actually. But I will say, like, even along the lines of William and Churio, I do think it could be a little difficult with a language barrier for both of them. I think William has a decent idea on the English, and I think he can converse with pitchers and stuff. But I think Willie, like, being that segue between the Spanish speakers and the English speakers has kind of been overlooked since he got here too. He made that a point when he came over, saying that helped him as much as anything in his big league career was learning and kind of perfecting English, and it just made him so much more comfortable. So I think that could be kind of tough, and it's not a knock on them at all. I think both of them are actually starting to. William, I know, is starting to understand questions, you can tell, and he doesn't need the translator as often to tell him what the questions are, which is great for them. I mean, I can't speak a lick of any other language, and I took 3 years of Spanish, and I don't remember any of it. So I give them a ton of credit for all the work they do on that stuff, but I do think that could make it a little tough in a leadership role if you're not able to converse with everybody pretty easily. So for me, that does leave Freddie as probably the most likely. But like you said, I think being a starting pitcher instead of an everyday player does make it a little bit different too. So I'd still say William and Freddie. I just think Freddie might have the easiest ability to converse and connect with everyone. But yeah, it's those two for me. And long term, I definitely could see Churio doing it. You can tell he's just always happy to be there, and that gives you a big Willie type of feeling. Like Willie just always seems happy to be playing baseball and very excited, and he plays with a lot of energy. And I think Churio's kind of similar. So I could totally see it down the line. I don't think it'll be next year, but yeah.
Final question we'll take in this section comes from Cheesehead Kami. He asks, what do you think the real impact of Garrett Mitchell will be on this current team? It seems like a lot of fans think he will hit the ground running, but I'm not so convinced. I think it's going to be, this is first of all assuming that he gets back to the big leagues in the near future without further setbacks. We'll kind of touch on that when we get to the injury update section at the end of the program. But I think it's going to be kind of similar to what we've seen before, where there's going to be some highlight reel moments. And I think those will be a real boost for the team in spurts. I don't know how consistently we're going to see that from him. Anytime Garrett Mitchell's name comes up, I'm probably saying the exact same thing, which is I don't believe in the bat a whole lot just because of the issues that he's had with the strikeouts, the issues that he's had with not elevating the ball. If you're swinging and missing and not elevating the ball, that can be a death sentence for some hitters. And the combination that he had shown in the minor leagues was not good. I will say I'm encouraged by how much he appears to be lifting the ball in this rehab stint.
Yep.
He's hitting the ball very hard and driving it. I think he's already got 4 home runs on this rehab stint that he's on. And he had a multi-home run game too, didn't he? Like early on.
He did.
So that
Yeah.
that has me wanting to believe that maybe he has actually tapped into something, but he's also coming off a hand injury, which also can complicate things a little bit. But the loud contact you're seeing right now is certainly never a bad sign. But I'm still going to be in this spot of I'm probably going to be lower on him than most guys, and I need to see something consistently to be proven wrong. And I want to be proven wrong. Like I've been proven wrong on guys before. Bryce Terang proved me wrong, and I'm happy he proved me wrong. And I want Garrett Mitchell to do the same thing. But I think that just when you look at between kind of tempered expectations and then the amount of depth that the Brewers have right now, I think it's going to be more of he has some big moments in a supplementary role overall. And he'll give them boosts at times. I don't think he's going to be a consistent contributor this year, if that makes sense. Do you have any differing thoughts on that or kind of the same?
No, I think it's been pretty well known that we both have our concerns with Mitchell. I will say, and shout out to Jake McKibben because he sent these numbers earlier today, but Mitchell in his first run at AAA, he had a career 7.7% sweet spot rate there and a 0.8 degree launch angle on average. This small sample, obviously, but in this rehab assignment, it's at 40% for his sweet spot rate and an 11.2 degree launch angle on average. So like you said, the numbers are pointing to a guy who's actually elevating the ball a bit more and doing it with authority. And I will say that he made a bit of a change to his swing and his setup, and you could see it in spring. It seemed kind of catered to trying to get under the ball a little bit more often. And it's AAA. It's hard to say if it's totally working, but the fact he's getting results from that change in his first real opportunity to show it, it's definitely not discouraging. I mean, it's a good thing. It's what we want to see. So if he can actually elevate the ball, he hits the ball hard. Like he's not like the other guys we've talked about from the left side in this episode. Like Garrett Mitchell impacts the ball, but in his case, it's just been a lot of choppers and a lot of ground balls. But if he hits the ball with the same level of authority and he gets it in the air more often, then you can live with some of that swing and miss because there's a trade-off of power. So yeah, we'll see. I mean, I guess I would say I'm probably as encouraged as I've been at any point during his time in the Brewers system as with his offensive profile. But like you said, I need to see it at the major league level before I'm going to get super excited about it. But yeah, it's good to see. I'm with Cheesehead Kami on this one, though. I think a lot of people are expecting more than what they're going to get, and it doesn't mean that he doesn't do okay in that role. Like Jack just said, I mean, he might have some big moments, and if he's in like a fourth outfield role, that you can't ask for much more. Steal some bases, play some good defense, and have some moments in the outfield, or at the plate. We'll take that every day. But I do think people get a little over their skis with Mitchell sometimes. So we'll see where it ends up falling.
He's, in terms of profile, he's always been the most electric out of all these prospects, but he's also had the highest variance in how his career and how his results could end up unfolding, just because of the concerns with the swing and miss, with the ground ball rate. It's interesting when you look at, even when this was always pretty well known when he was coming up as a prospect, but the scouting reports on him, just the difference between his raw power grades and his game power grades was astronomical. Like I don't remember off the top of my head what the highest grade he got for his raw power was, but it was pretty high at one point. Like he's always had the ability, like you said, to impact the ball. Like out of all these Brewers prospects offensively who have come up through the system these last few years, the reason he was the first rounder and really one of the first guys to get some traction. First of all, he was drafted before some of these other guys, so that helps too. But also just the buzz surrounding him was always because out of all those guys, he was the one who consistently had impressive exit velocities. Like you knew there was something in there. It was just that honestly, up until this stretch right now, this is the first time as a prospect we've ever even really seen him tap into that. So I can see like where that excitement's coming from, because this is kind of what a lot of prospect evaluators are waiting to see from him. And we're seeing it now on this rehab assignment. So we'll see how much it shows up when he gets to the big league. Because if he has figured that out and he's elevating the ball more, then my opinion on him flips completely. Then it suddenly becomes, sky's probably the limit for this guy between the speed and now having the power. Like it is an electric profile. It's just a matter of, has he found a way to cut down on some of the pitfalls that are extremely alarming in his profile. So again, there's a lot of different outcomes you can have here, and that's why I've had my expectations tempered. But we'll see what happens when he gets back. As long as we're talking about what Garrett Mitchell is doing in the minor leagues, that does make for a pretty good segue into Spencer's favorite section of the podcast, and he would tell you the most important section of the podcast. It's Spencer's minor league sandbox, where Spencer talks about everything that's happening in the Brewers player development system at the lower levels of professional baseball. Well, not lower levels, because it can be AAA as well, or AA.
That's right. Yeah.
But sometimes
you talk about all the levels, Jack.
Talking about all the levels. Sometimes you like to focus on some of the inaugural levels as well, though, because you like to follow some of the younger international signings or whatever it may be. But I'll let you dive right into it right now.
Well, thank you, Jack. I appreciate that. We're going to start off. We got a two-part question, I guess, from Frankenstein 19. First question is about Mike Bovee. He said, Mike Bovee hasn't played since June 20th. Any word on his status or situation? So he's just dealing with some shoulder soreness. It doesn't sound like it's anything major. He got scratched from a game at the same time as Eric Brown Jr., which I may have caused a bit of a scene, making people think that there might be a trade coming, because I tweeted something along the lines of, we should probably monitor this. And in the end, it sounds like both of them were just actually banged up and had to get scratched from the game. So no hug watch on that, but that's all that's wrong with Bovee. It sounds like he'll be back pretty soon. And then he asked, can you give a general rundown of Isaac Collins as a player? He seems to be performing fairly well, but he's never mentioned as a call-up option. So I'll touch on that last part first. I think the main issue for him is that the Brewers have a bunch of guys that they consider kind of utility players on their 40-man already, and he is not. He's definitely a utility guy. He's really not great defensively anywhere, but he's serviceable in a lot of spots. He can play some second base. He can play the corner outfield. He's played some shortstop in the Brewers system, even last year, maybe this year too. Really what makes him interesting is the bat. And since May 11th, he's got a 962 OPS overall. It's 936 from the left side and 1,041 from the right side. He's a switch hitter from both sides of the plate in that span. His chase rate is 18% or lower. His hard hit rate is over 40%. His contact rate is over 80%. And he's hitting the ball in the air at over a 60% clip from both sides as well. And his overall whiff rate of 17.6% is 90th percentile in AAA. So the bat's legitimately been playing. He hits the ball with some authority. It's an interesting guy, and I wouldn't be shocked if they added him to the 40-man this offseason if he doesn't make his way to the majors. He also might be somebody that I could see being moved at the deadline to somebody who has an opportunity to actually play him, maybe for one of like those depth type starters from some other team that's kind of going into a rebuild like the A's or something like that. But he seems like somebody who could make an impact at the major league level at some point. And he was a Rule 5 draft pick in the minor league segment of that a couple of years ago, which means he wasn't even protected at the AAA level by the Rockies. So he's come a pretty long way in those 2 years with the Brewers. But moving on to our pitching performances that we're going to highlight, we'll start with the name that probably everybody knows, which is Jacob Misiorowski. His last 2 starts, he's gone 11 2/3 shutout innings. He's only given up 4 hits. He's only walked 2, and he struck out 13. I was able to watch his start this past Tuesday, a few days ago. That was the best I've seen his command at any point in his pro career. Just a lot of the misses were small, and there weren't that many of them. He was dotting at 98, 99. He touched 100 3 times. The slider was okay, pretty good at times. It sits in like that low 90s range. It gets kind of cutterish once in a while, so that was kind of interesting. The shape isn't super consistent, but it gets a ton of swing and miss either way just because it's late breaking, low 90s after seeing upper 90s and triple digits at times. And then he threw the curve a decent amount. It started off pretty. He was leaving it up and arm it a lot early in the start, but he really found it after a few, really in like the 3rd inning. And that to me is the better breaking ball of the two. So good to see some recent results with just limited walks, throwing a lot more strikes. And when he does, it's hard to hit him. But Tate Keener, we've talked about him a couple times, probably a lot actually. He's one of my favorite under the radar guys right now. He's just continuing to pitch really well. I feel like he needs to be in Biloxi at some point in the second half here. He's just been so good. In June, his ERA is 1.64 in 22 innings. He's got 25 strikeouts to only 8 walks in that time. He's just been fantastic for a guy who was basically a swingman at Louisville. He's been really, really good at a level that's pretty much on par for his age in high A. So it's been a great start to his career. Another guy from last year's draft that's performing. And then Eniel Cortez, he was promoted to low A from the complex league where the ERA wasn't great, but he had way more strikeouts than walks. He had really good peripherals coming into it. He only turned 18 on May 1st. He's the youngest pitcher at low A right now. He's made 2 starts. He's gone 8 innings total. He has 9 strikeouts to 4 walks, a 1.13 ERA on the 1 earned run that he allowed. The fastball has some late movement, and it's sat 91 to 93. It's been up to 94. He's got an upper 70s curveball that he commands well, like really well. He can land it on either side of the plate. And then a changeup in the 83 to 85 range that he was landing really like a ton of backdoor changeups to righties. And it's late movement. It's got a kind of a short slider from a lefty point of view. It's got that kind of shape, at least on video. And the command, like I talked about, the strikeout to walk ratio is fantastic in his career. The command looks like it might be borderline plus. This is an 18-year-old throwing up to 94 with really good command and decent secondaries. This is a guy we probably want to keep an eye on. His overall strikeout to walk ratio in pro ball between the DSL, the Arizona Complex League, and low A now is 85 to 12 for a 7-to-1 strikeout to walk ratio. That's really, really good, especially for somebody his age. So he's one I'll be watching very closely. And then on the offensive side, it hasn't, a lot of the names I was going to talk about are just, we've talked about them a lot already. So I brought a few new ones. Lamar Sparks, he was an indie ball signing a couple of years ago, one of the rare position player indie ball signings that the Brewers have had. He had a really, really rough start to the year, but in June, he has an 887 OPS and a couple of home runs. He's a fantastic athlete. I would argue he might have the best throwing arm I've seen in the Brewer system, and that includes guys like Joey Weimer. I don't know if he's a major leaguer long term, but I do get some Blake Perkins vibes because he's very good defensively, good arm, good athlete, and the offense just hasn't clicked yet. But that's kind of where Perkins was before his final season in the Yankee system, before he ended up signing a major league deal with the Brewers. And I just get some of that vibe from him. So he's someone I'll just continue to watch for sure. And then Hader Arenamo, he first of all, he's performing extremely well. He's up to a 780 OPS for the season. His walk rate is almost double what it was the season before. It's up from 4 to 7.5, which 7.5 isn't great, but 4 was pretty borderline unplayable. It's pretty hard to succeed with that low of a walk rate. He's already got 5 homers this year. He only had 4 last season, 23 of 27 on steals. And I think he's a pretty solid defender from what I've been able to see on MILB TV. Fangraphs has him as like a 30 grade glove, and I don't see that at all. I think he's at least decent. But really, the thing with him is it's a really weird load. He basically spins the bat in a big circle while he's loading. Like, it almost looks almost a Super Mario type of load. Like, it's hard to believe he can actually do it, but by the time he needs to swing, he's always in a pretty good spot, and it's pretty hard to argue with the results so far. And then on the DSL side, I just got to update Luis Pena because he has been absolutely incredible. OPS is still 1220 after 66 plate appearances now. He's got 4 doubles, 3 triples, and a homer, 21 of 23 on stolen base attempts. Now, he has been caught twice since we last had our update. He was 20 of 20 at one point. He's 1 for his last 3, so he's slumping in the stolen base category, but it's still been an incredible start to a pro career. 5 walks, 3 hit by pitches, and only 6 strikeouts. So 8 free passes to 6 strikeouts in that time too. It's been an incredible start, like I said, and he's getting some attention. So is Jesus Mate, who I've talked about a lot nationally as kind of 2 of like the top 3 or 4 prospects that are in the DSL right now. So the Brewers might have hit pretty big on this international class, and that's why I've touched on them so much already, because there's a lot of performers, and it's backed up by some of the data too. I know Jesus Mate is already at just barely 17 years old, already posting 107 exit velos on homers. So that's pretty impressive for a shortstop. And yeah, that's all we got for the minor league section of this. And I'll pass it back to Jack for the all these injury updates. There, we got a lot of injury updates to go through.
We do have a lot of injury updates to go through, so we'll try to get through this as concisely as we can, is the word I'll use. We'll start first by talking about Robert Gasser, who did officially undergo his Tommy John surgery. Pat Murphy told us that he's looking at a 12 to 14 month recovery timeline. So we're probably not going to see him at full strength until 2026. Just a really unfortunate development for Robert Gasser, who got off to such a strong start to his MLB career, but in some ways, just with where things were at with the elbow throughout the entirety of the year so far, it kind of seemed like this is where this was headed. Still disappointing to hear. Just, you feel for Robert Gasser after the work that he's put in and how encouraging his career started, but hopefully he'll come back better than ever, either in late 2025 or 2026, whenever that may be. But 12 to 14 months is what they're looking at for him. Gary Sanchez, as we mentioned before, was placed on the 10-day injured list with what Matt Arnold described as a low-grade calf strain. He said before Wednesday's game that they're hoping it's a short absence, but they just want to be cautious with him. Like we talked about, Eric Haas is up on the 40-man roster now, had his contract selected. He's with the team as their backup catcher and will remain there until Gary's ready to come back. Oliver Dunn, who was optioned to AAA on June 19th, had that optional assignment undone basically on Wednesday, and the Brewers instead put him on the 10-day MLB injured list, a back strain. We haven't heard anything about what happened there, but basically, if a player injures himself in the big leagues, you're not allowed to option him to the minor leagues. So, reading between the
Yeah.
lines, what probably happened here is that they found out that there was some kind of lingering injury he was dealing with, perhaps. And if he initially sustained that lingering injury in the big leagues, you got to put him on the MLB injured list. Dunn had not appeared in a game since he went down to AAA, but whatever paperwork or formalities was going on there, the final roster move there has been made. We'll see if we hear more on his status during the next homestand. Joey Ortiz, like we talked about, left the series finale against the Rangers. Midway through that game, Pat Murphy said that he's been dealing with a neck thing, is what he called it. So basically, just some neck tightness. He's been dealing with that since the series in Anaheim against the Angels. Sounds like it's not a major concern, but just they kind of have to take it day to day a little bit. He was out of the lineup a few days ago as well. It turns out that that was due to him kind of trying to manage that injury a little bit. Just sounds like it's something the Brewers will have to monitor. They did have the off day on Thursday, so hopefully that helps him a little bit in that regard, but it doesn't sound like much of a lasting injury, just kind of something that you need to make sure that it stays loose and just manage it as best you can. Devin Williams got on a mound for the first time on Wednesday. He threw a bullpen at home. Matt Arnold told us that he's likely to be back somewhere around the middle to end of July. He did leave open the possibility that we could see Devin Williams pitch for the Brewers before the trade deadline. But more than anything, they just want to make sure that they have him on a good timeline to make sure that he's back at full strength. But encouraging to see him get back on a mound for the first time since he was shut down in spring training with the stress fractures in his back. Joe Ross threw a bullpen the day before on Tuesday. Pat Murphy said before he threw that bullpen that if that went well, the next steps would be another bullpen with some up downs to kind of simulate a start, so to speak. And then he would go on a rehab assignment. Regardless of how everything unfolds exactly, you're looking at a return after the All-Star break. He was shifted to the 60-day IL as part of the series of moves that the Brewers made to clear 40-man spots for Eric Haas and Dallas Keuchel. Moving him to the 60-day IL does nothing to impact his timeline because that essentially got shoved back to after the All-Star break once he had that setback with the back a few weeks ago. So it's really just a paper move more than anything. His outlook hasn't changed, but sometime after the All-Star break again is kind of what they're looking at for him. We talked about Garrett Mitchell's rehab assignment in AAA. He left on Wednesday night, or Wednesday afternoon, I should say, with an apparent hamstring injury. He swung and missed at a pitch in the ninth inning in his final at-bat, and he was kind of grabbing at that left hamstring afterward, but he's back in the lineup tonight for Nashville as the designated hitter. Spencer, have you been keeping tabs on that game? Do you have any idea?
I was just looking at it right now to check. He went 1 for 2 and then he was pinch hit for. So I don't know if that was just planned or if that had something to do with it, but he did exit after 2 at bats.
Okay. Well, we'll look into that a little bit more, but my first instinct is to say that they're being careful with him after that happened, so maybe they decided it was just going to be a half night for him, especially since he's in there as the DH after that happened. But I don't have any official information on that I know of. I'm just speculating. DL Hall is rehabbing in AAA. He pitched on Tuesday. The velocity looked really good for him, as our friend Spencer Michaelis tweeted out during that start. But he averaged 94.3 miles an hour with the fastball, and the last one he threw was 95.3 miles an hour. And that's also encouraging because he threw 46 pitches in that outing. It sounds like the Brewers are at least going to build him up a little bit, maybe kind of looking at the Jacob Junis route where he's at least stretched out to go 2 to 3 innings at a time, maybe out of the bullpen, maybe on the front end of games. They've kind of been a little coy on what his exact role is going to be, but it does look like they're stretching him out at least a little bit. But to see him maintain that velocity over 46 pitches, I think is pretty encouraging, don't you think?
Yeah, extremely. I mean, the start before he was even touching some 96s and stuff, but that was an inning. And seeing him go 46 pitches, get up, down 3 times, that's important. And seeing it hold, and like you said, the last one being over 95, that's really good to see. The shape on it wasn't great still, but it's better than it was in the major leagues too. So that's good to see as well. Probably close to the best it's been because the vertical approach angle was the best it's been in this in this last outing, and I think that had more to do with him spotting it really well. He was up at the top of the zone more often, but yeah, just encouraging. It's the type of stuff we were really hoping to see on these rehab assignments for him, and we're seeing it, so that's good.
So again, 46 pitches across 2 2/3 innings for DL Hall in that rehab outing. No word yet on when we can expect to see him back, but things do seem to be trending in the right direction there. We'll wrap up the program by previewing the upcoming series at home against the Cubs. Craig Counsell and Milwaukee's division rival to the south. They are returning to American Family Field this weekend. We're going to have Colin Ray and Jamison Tyone on the bump for game one. That's going to be a 7:10 first pitch on Friday night. Brewers ace Colin Ray getting the game one start in a division rivalry series. Tobias Myers is going to take the ball in game two. He'll be facing left-hander Justin Steele, who gave the Brewers a little bit of trouble his last time out. Game three, we're going to have Freddie Peralta and Kyle Hendricks. Kyle Hendricks has not been giving anyone a hard time when he's been on the bump this year. He was recently moved back into the starting rotation in response to an injury that the Cubs are battling. I don't remember off the top of my head who it is that got hurt, but do you know?
I know Assad went on the IL today, but it was somebody before
It was something before that.
Yeah,
because
maybe
he's been in the
Brown. It actually
rotation
might have been
and
Brown.
okay, yeah. But Kyle Hendricks had been demoted to the bullpen. He's back in the rotation now out of necessity. Again, Freddie Peralta will start opposite him. That's going to be a 110 series finale. Hopefully everyone is able to tune into some good baseball this weekend. Either way, should be an interesting atmosphere at the ballpark for anyone who maybe plans on attending any of these division rivalry games. But we'll be back with all of you guys at this same time next week to recap all of the action for you. Until then, thank you to everybody who listened to this week's podcast. Thank you to everyone who listens almost every week or has listened to any episode we've put out so far. Thank you to everyone who sent in questions. We usually don't get to all of them. We try to get to as many as we can, but we see all of them, assuming you send them to the podcast Twitter or send an email or whatever it may be. We try to work as many in as we can, and we appreciate all the engagement that we receive. You can follow the podcast at BF_pod on Twitter /X, whatever everybody calls it these days. You can follow me at by Jack Stern, and you can follow Spencer at SMichaelis234. You can get some updates throughout the week from us on everything that's going on relating to the Brewers whenever I'm not up north. But apparently Spencer just spends all of his time watching the Brewers no matter what. So you can always count on great content from Spencer. But until next week, thank you all for listening, and go Brewers.